So what does all of this mean for Trump legally? Well, joining me now is Joe Moreno and Sarah Kristoff, former US federal prosecutors, and Mark Zaid, an intelligence attorney who represents government and military officers among his clients. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us this evening. Sarah, starting with you, coming to you, Joe and Mark, after. Now, you've no doubt been combing through the 49-page unsealed indictment. What stood out to you?
I think the government really tried to put its best foot forward here. They have not had the opportunity to date to set forth in a compelling fashion the evidence they have in the case. They did that here. They had the choice of whether to do a more bare bones indictment or do an indictment that really walks the defendant, the former president, and the public through the evidence here. And they chose to really prepare this robust indictment, and so they can tell the world what the evidence is that they intend to go forward on.
Joe, what stood out to you? Would you agree with that assessment there from Sarah?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I can see almost the opening statement at this trial, which is quite some time away still, if it happens. But I can see right now, I think what's jumping out at us is the classified national defense information type documents and the secret, top secret, and the fact that they were so sloppily maintained down at Mar-a-Lago. But I think what's really going to be the driver of this case is more the obstruction and this narrative that unlike the case of Joe Biden and Mike Pence, who were cooperative, Donald Trump had a long time to set the record straight here. He had months to return these documents to the National Archives. Then he was faced with a subpoena. He still didn't comply. And then it took the FBI to get these documents back. And I think that's what's going to be the focus, to say, look, no one, not a former president or anyone, can be allowed to defy a grand jury and get away with it. So while the classified nature of the documents, they might be what's grabbing the headlines now, I think it's going to be really the obstruction, the effectively perjury, that's going to be what really drives this case.
Yeah, and Mark, listening to that, Joe just saying there that for him, it was really the obstruction, the allegations of obstruction that stood out for him. You, as an attorney, what did you make of it?
So, and obviously my colleagues are as well. I don't think there was much in the way that was inconsistent with what we expected. That much of these facts have come out over the course of time, not necessarily in a way that was acknowledged, leaks to the media. I'd say the one thing that surprised me factually was how personally involved the allegations are with the former president, particularly with even packing up boxes and going through the boxes. Those were always things that would make a significant difference in any prosecution, but we didn't have any real reported evidence of it. It's also surprised that the prosecutor thinks they need about 21 days to try this case. I'm not quite sure it would frankly take that long. That would be interesting. And then I think on a humorous note, after 30 years of law practice, I don't think I've ever stored documents in a shower, but apparently President Trump did.
Well, on that point, on those images, we saw some really extraordinary ones. I mean, we're talking about, as you say, boxes in bathrooms, showers, ballrooms, and that was really laid out clearly in this indictment. Sarah, what do you think that means for this case?
This is going to be an uphill battle for Trump and his legal team. And what is set forth in the indictment is evidence that is hard to refute. Trump's legal team can fight the accounts by witnesses and fight their testimony. It's hard to refute recordings and photographs and text messages. That kind of evidence is difficult to overcome. That's why I'm sure the Department of Justice included it here, and it has certainly captured our attention, and I'm sure Trump's legal team's attention as well.
And Mark, to you, what does it mean that these were, not just stored in all sorts of different parts of his Mar-a-Lago estate, but also classified, in some cases, highly sensitive documents?
Well, it raises the prospect for a potential superseding indictment, meaning more charges to be filed if there is additional evidence that either comes to light or for whatever reason was held back with who gained access, if anyone, to these records. Those are not allegations at the moment, other than two instances where they said Trump described or even possibly showed the documents. But we all know, because this has been publicly reported, that there have been foreign intelligence officials who have been arrested for being on the premises down at Mar-a-Lago. Many foreigners, and no doubt it was an intelligence bonanza for foreign agents to be in and around Mar-a-Lago operating as a country club. And the reality is the classified component of this will be mostly held in the pretrial phase. Espionage Act cases are pretty narrow when they actually get to trial. There's not a lot of wiggle room for a defendant to really challenge much other than did you do it or not. And as was mentioned, because there's photographic evidence, there's video evidence, there were documents seized by the FBI, returned after long periods of time directly to the government by the Trump legal team. There's not going to be any argument that that did not occur.
Right. And also, interestingly, Joe, in this indictment, we saw quotes from the former president himself dating back to 2016 with specific regards to the classification of documents. I want to take a listen, actually, to some of his comments in the past on this and then come back to you.
In my administration, I'm going to enforce all laws concerning the protection of classified information. No one will be above the law.
And in fact, those comments were actually directly cited in that indictment. Joe, why include them? Do they carry any legal weight?
Well, I mean, in addition to what you played, there were also quotes of Donald Trump knocking Hillary Clinton, right? Also in the course of the 2016 campaign. You know, I thought they were a little extraneous. I mean, you know, part of this speaking indictment, as we call it, is to tell a narrative, and it makes both legal and political points. So I thought some of that language was not really necessary in sort of charging this case. What they're trying to do is they're trying to show Donald Trump's state of mind and undermine any argument that this was a good faith mistake or that he didn't understand his ability to handle classified or classified information or his powers to declassify information. They want to show that he darn well knew, even before he was president, that there were certain rules about how to handle classified information, and therefore they're trying to undermine his ability at trial to say, I didn't understand or I wasn't intentional in violating these laws.
Sarah, your thoughts on that?
No, I agree completely with Joe. This is, you know, an attempt by DOJ to show intent. You know, intent is also often inferred. It is often shown by circumstantial evidence. And so this is some of that circumstantial evidence so they can show the former president's intent here and his knowledge of the underlying laws.
Well, talking about proceedings then, we know, of course, now that this hearing will take place in a federal court in Miami with Judge Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee. Joe, to you, do you think that this could impact proceedings?
Well, I mean, first off, as far as next Tuesday, it's going to be a little anticlimactic, right? It will not be in public. It will be a very quick arraignment. They'll read the charges and there'll be a plea entered of not guilty, and that'll be it. So not a lot's going to happen as far as dramatic nature on Tuesday. And of course, the indictment we have already, so we don't have to worry about it being unsealed next week. As far as the judge, I mean, the fact that she's a Trump appointee and had some prior involvement in this case in the pretrial phase, you know, look, there'll be some criticism of whether or not she should be the best person to try the case. Ultimately, it'll probably be up to her whether to recuse herself. And I don't know that we've seen a good reason for that to happen. But I do think it's going to add to the narrative here on the drama of whether or not this is the best person to be serving as the trial judge.
And Mark, you know, we've also seen his attorneys, two attorneys this morning, leave the case. Do you think that that could mean anything for how this unfolds, you know, coming up to Tuesday?
Not for Tuesday, just as Joe described. There's not going to be much that will take place. And Judge Cannon may not even stay with the rest of the case. Part of it depends if it stays in Miami. It goes up to more towards what where the Mar-a-Lago is. Sorry, I'm blanking on the county, Palm Beach County, whatever it is, where there's a satellite court. But look, he has had difficulty retaining lawyers for a number of reasons. And the reality is, at least in the realm of where I practice, I have watched many of their public comments with a great deal of consideration. And I quite frankly, not commenting on strategy, but they've been very inaccurate in how they've described presidential authority about classification, declassification, how the Espionage Act works. They've been very good at catering to the Trump base from a public relations standpoint, but they did not have a lot of experience in handling these types of cases. There's not that many lawyers, frankly, who do, particularly from the defensive side, more on the prosecution side. So it's not surprising he's going to switch legal teams, and he's going to need to get someone who really knows what they're doing, both in a courtroom and by way of the law.
And ultimately, of course, I mean, that is, as you say, just the first step. Final word then to you, Sarah. We are seeing a tangle of legal proceedings for the former president in the middle of his campaign. How do you see this impacting the election?
Listen, if I'm Trump's counsel, my intention here would be to drag this out as long as possible, and to focus the public's attention elsewhere. I mean, he's got to navigate this case, the Manhattan DA's office case, which I think is frankly a much less of a threat to him. But I think this is a risk. This case is a risk to him. There are significant penalties if convicted at trial. He's got to really be thinking hard about, is he going to just push through this or take a moment and think about, strategically how he's going to fight this.
All right, to our esteemed panel, thank you so much to all of you for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Well, for more, we can speak to Frank